Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, and thank you for watching IT Pro TV, helping you level up with IT learning anywhere you go. I'm your host, Zach Memis. For this episode of CompTIA Linux Plus, Configuring Networking is the title of this episode, and of course you knew that. And the one and only Don Pizzetta is here to show us the way. Don, good to see you.
Hey, glad to be here, Zach. And in this episode, we're going to continue our networking adventures. We had a chance to learn a little bit about TCP/IP networking in the previous episode. Now we're going to change gears and talk about how we get networking configured on our Linux systems. We're going to take a look at assigning IP addresses, DNS servers, basic configuration to turn on an interface, and get things just, in general, get them up and working, which is kind of an important thing. So that's all coming up right here in this episode.
How can we view our current network configuration, Don?
Yeah, that's a great place to start because the odds are your system's already configured. And, it's really come a long way from configuring back in the day, even like 15 years ago. If you had a Linux box, configuring network was kind of a pain in the butt. Now, most of it's automatic. So you may already be set up without even actually changing anything. So we certainly need to take a look at our existing configuration. Unfortunately, as is the way in many Linux systems, there's more than one way to do it. So let me show you a couple of different ways that you can view your configuration. I want to start with some of the older tools. Older tools are generally present on a lot of systems, especially servers, so you can kind of count on them. But they're being replaced by newer tools, so we've got to kind of learn both sets right now while we're in transition. Previously, if I wanted to find an IP address on a system, I would drop to a terminal, and I would use the command ifconfig. That's the interface configuration command. And it's a powerful tool. It lets you see the configuration and edit the configuration and so on, but it is an older tool. And in fact, if you do newer installs, like the latest version of Ubuntu, it doesn't even have ifconfig installed by default. The new versions of Red Hat don't either. So this is one where you can still install it if you want it, but it's not there by default anymore. So be careful with that. But if you run it, you'll see a list of all of your network adapters and their addresses. And if your network adapters are already on and you're using DHCP, you'll likely already have an address and be up and running and ready to rock, right? So, just all right there. The only thing this really doesn't show us is it doesn't show us who our default gateway is. You need to be set to use a router to be able to gain access to other networks. And the older command for that was route. You just ran the route command. That would show you what your route was. And I can see that I have a default route that's pointing to our router here in the office. And then it's on interface ENS33. So that's the interface that I'm going out. This is really handy to make sure that I'm pointed to the right system. Now, those are the old commands. Let's move to the new commands. The new commands have all of this rolled up into one command. There's a new command called IP, and we can use that for configuring Internet Protocol. If you type IP ADDR, it will show you your address information. And so I see basically the same output as ifconfig, just in a new command, right? So IP ADDR, and I can see my address right here, just like I did before. If I want to see my route, I can run IP route. And right there, I can see the routing information again, basically the same information as the old one. So you might ask yourself, why bother learning two commands? You really shouldn't have to. You should just learn the IP commands. But you will encounter machines that don't have the IP command. It's just taking a little bit of time to make that transition happen. Probably in the next 2 years, it's really that close. In the next 2 years, we'll see everybody transition over to using the IP command. So that's certainly the one that you want to get used to.
Well, is there anything that we should do before we start changing things?
Yeah, if you're just dealing with a simple problem, right? Let's say that you're set for DHCP, but for some reason you're not getting a DHCP address. That doesn't mean it's time to start editing config files and messing around. Sometimes you might just need to give your system a little kick to get it going, right? And there's a few ways to do that. Everybody's probably heard the saying, like, have you restarted and tried again, right? If something doesn't work, a lot of times you reboot and things get fixed. Well, we don't actually have to reboot our system. We can do little things with the network to restart it. So for example, if I'm not getting a DHCP address, maybe the DHCP service isn't running. And so there's a utility you can run, DH client. And when you run DH client, oops, I need to sudo that, so I'm not an administrator right now. So I'm going to sudo DH client. That's going to turn on that client and get it to reach out and start getting an address. And see how mine's kind of paused, right? Mine wasn't running. So well, it's because I had a static address. I don't anymore because I just started this service. So it reached out and it grabbed an address and it took it a moment to do that. So, maybe that's what your situation is. It's just not running. If it is running and it didn't get an address, maybe you just need to force a retry. You could do sudo dhclient-r, which tells it to retry, to release the lease that it's got and try and get a new one. And we can do that. Doesn't require rebooting the whole computer, just a quick little reset there. We can even get more aggressive though. Like maybe it's a problem with the driver from a network adapter or for a configuration file that's been changed, it just hasn't loaded. So we're not processing the changes yet. So we could restart our entire networking stack. This is a little more aggressive, but is effective. On a systemd based system, which is most of them these days, the command you'll run is sudo systemctl restart network. All right. That's actually all you have to type, but the full command would actually be network.service, but it's going to assume .service even if I leave that off. And that's going to restart my entire networking stack. So it's going to shut down the physical driver, the software, the TCP/IP stack is going to shut down, and then it's going to turn it all back on, bring the interfaces back up, and so on. That's kind of like rebooting, but just rebooting the network side, right? And it'll take it a moment, so we kind of see it pause there. Now, that's the way we do it on systemd-based systems, and I mentioned that's most systems these days, but not all. Like if you're running Slackware Linux, they don't use systemd. They're still based off of the old sysvinit. And so for them, you have a different command that you'll use, which is service network restart. All right. I think that'll work under CentOS. Yeah, under CentOS, it just converts it. Oh, did I forget to sudo that? I did. So anyhow, it converts it in CentOS, and I believe Ubuntu does this as well. It'll take the old command and automatically convert it over. See how it says via systemctl? So the old command still works, but don't get in the habit of using the old command. You need to learn the new stuff. Systemctl restart network. So a little bit of variation here. On the old one, it was service network restart. Light difference there. But those little steps right there can save you from diving into configuration and changing settings. Sometimes you just have to restart the networking and your system comes back up.
Where are the network interface configurations stored?
All right, so let's say I actually do want to go in and change my configuration. Maybe I want to specify different DNS servers, or we brought in a new router, and so I need to change my default gateway. Well, restarting the protocol stack isn't going to do anything there, right? I actually have to go and change my configuration. I wish I could tell you there's one place you can go, and here's where your configuration is. But unfortunately, the different distributions have not done a great job of maintaining the same place to store things. And it's because there's a number of different ways to configure it. So let me show you the two main ones, the ones that are on the exam, but also the ones that are the most popular in real life. So I'm on my CentOS box. So let's start right here. And in CentOS, also Red Hat and Fedora, so all three of those guys, and anybody based on it, you're going to find the network configuration stored in /etc/sysconfig. If you look inside of that folder, /etc/sysconfig, you'll find a number of different folders that are in there and various files. Some of them are pretty important. The main one that I'm looking for is this folder right here, network-scripts. All right. If you go into network-scripts, so my full path now is /etc/sysconfig/network-scripts. What you'll find in there are script files. That's why they're all green, right? They're little bash scripts that run whenever an interface comes up or if an interface goes down. These are commands that will be run. And each interface will have its own script. My interface we saw in the IPADDR command earlier was called ENS33. And so I can see right here, there's an IFCFG-ENS33. That's where the interface configuration for that interface is stored. And if I edit that, you'll need to be an administrator to do this. So I'm going to sudo vim, and I'm going to edit IFCFG-ENS33. And when you take a look at the settings in there, you'll see a lot of the stuff that you expect to see. It's type Ethernet, which I already knew because of the name of EN attached to it. I can see there's no proxy set on it. The boot protocol is set to DHCP, right? I had a static IP, but I broke that when I used DH client. So right now I'm set to get a DHCP address. I have a default route that's being pulled from the DHCP server, so that's set to yes. I can see some IPv6 settings. The name of the adapter is defined right here. And on boot equals yes. That means when my computer turns on, this network adapter is automatically turned on as well. If that wasn't there, the network adapter would be off, and I would have to turn it on when I was ready to use it. But this configuration As you look down the list here is pretty straightforward. Let me just talk real quick on that name, ENS33, and where that came from. EN means it's a physical network adapter, an Ethernet adapter. You might see WL, and that would be a wireless adapter, or you might see, in rare cases, WW, which would be a cellular adapter, right? I don't know what WW stands for there, but maybe worldwide or
WWAN?
who knows? Yeah, wireless WAN. That is probably it. Thank you, Zach. So WW. The third letter, though, I've got an S. What you'll normally see here is O for onboard, P for PCI, or S for hot plug support. So mine has hot plug support, so it shows up as an S, but you'll see one of those. So you might have ENO or ENP, in my case, ENS. And then 33 is just the number that it got assigned. I don't know why it ended up being 33. It actually starts at 0, and then it goes up from there. So apparently I've had 32 different adapters before this one. There's a lot of virtual adapters that will come up. Anytime you create a VPN tunnel, it creates virtual adapters, and so those numbers can get elevated based on that. All right. So that's all stuff that we find inside of this file, and you can go through and kind of mess around with it. Let's say I wanted to have a static address. I could come up here to boot protocol where it says DHCP, and I'm just going to delete DHCP and replace that with the word none. So boot protocol equals none. That means don't automatically configure your address. And once I do that, I can then say IP ADDR 0. You can have more than one IP address. So I could do IP ADDR 1, IP ADDR 2. So I start with 0 equals, and then I can set it to 10.0.222.222, or whatever IP address it is that I want to use. I then need to specify my subnet. So I'll say prefix 0 equals, and we're using a 16-bit subnet here in the building, so I can assign that. I can manually set a gateway if I know I've got a hard set gateway here. Gateway 0 equals 10.0.0.1, and defining each one of these settings based on this. I've got that default route equals yes. I don't really need that one. If you're messing around with this file, I deleted a line a moment ago. Oh, no, I didn't. I just changed the setting. But what I usually recommend is commenting outlines like this with a little pound symbol so that they don't get executed. And then that way you can kind of see what setting was there before. If you're afraid you're going to forget, which is something that I do. So you can come through and define each one of these, get them kind of set the way that you want, and then the changes don't actually take effect until you restart the network stack. So this would be a chance to go in and use that systemctl restart network.service. That'll restart and load all these changes. Or the other option is to reboot your computer. Now, everything that I just showed you was on a CentOS box. Let me just quickly jump over to an Ubuntu box. Let me actually get out of this. There. And we'll go over to Ubuntu. And what we're going to see here...
Ubuntu and the Atomic Beaver.
On the Bionic Beaver.
Bionic Beaver, that's
there we
right.
go. So
I thought it was a tough.
That's this release's code name. But if I go into my terminal here, we're going to see things are a little bit different. Under CentOS, we went to /etc/sysconfig, right? If I go to /etc/sysconfig here, that directory doesn't exist, right? Ubuntu stores it in a different place. So I've got to look in a different area. If I go into /etc and look around, you'll find a folder in there somewhere called network. There it is, right there. All right, here's where things get super tricky too. Ubuntu used to store the configurations inside a network, and yours very well may have it there. But most of their installs have started moving over to a system called NetPlan. And NetPlan is another folder right here. So your config could actually be in either one of these, and you don't necessarily know. So we had to look. Let me go into network and see what I've got. I probably should have looked before the show. When I go into network, see how it's kind of similar to what we saw under CentOS? There's all these little script folders and files. But there's one file in particular called interface, or interfaces. And if I take a look at the interfaces file, I don't see much in here. I just see a loopback. There's a loopback that's configured to go on automatically, and that's it, right? If I do IP ADDR, I can see that my adapter on this one is called ENS33 also, but it's not showing up in interfaces. So that means this one must be using NetPlan. So if I get out of the network folder and go into the NetPlan folder and look in there, sure enough, I can see a configuration file. That 99_config.yaml is where we'll normally put the configuration for an adapter. And let's take a look at that one. 99. There we go. Now, the syntax is very different than what we saw under our CentOS box, but the settings are kind of the same. As you look down the list here, I can see that it is, the name is ENS33. It's got an IP address. This one's 10.0.10.221. It's got a gateway set for 10.0.0.1. and it's got some name servers assigned to it, and they're all right here. Whenever that interface comes up, it's going to grab these settings and apply them to that adapter. This one's not set for DHCP, it's just a static IP. So it's a different place. Also, I mentioned with CentOS that the changes don't take effect until you restart the network service. The same would be true here on Ubuntu if I was in the network folder. If I'm making changes in /etc/network, then I would do a systemctl restart network. But with NetPlan, I can actually just need to tell NetPlan to apply the changes, which is really cool because it doesn't have to restart anything. It's still running. It just applies the changes so you don't lose connectivity. And you would do that by doing a sudo netplan apply like that. That tells it to apply the changes that were made inside of that folder, and now the changes take effect. So that's the way that it's handled in Ubuntu. It's different, it's weird, but that's just how it is.
What about global settings like DNS servers?
There are some settings that we might not want to stick inside of a single adapter, right? DNS servers are a great example of that, but maybe even a default gateway, though. If you have more than one adapter that's on the same subnet, then they might share the same default gateway. If I have DNS servers, I might have 2 or 3 different network adapters, but I'm using the same set of DNS servers. So many settings don't go in the interface config. If it's going to be global, it needs to go somewhere else. DNS is a great example of that. Let me just go back here to my CentOS box. I'm in /etc/sysconfig. I went right to the network-scripts folder earlier, but if you look in there, you'll see a lot of other files and things in here that all have to do with other stuff. So for example, there's a file in here called network. And it's just a regular file, not a folder. And if I take a look at what's in there, it's empty. All right, mine just says created by Anaconda, and that's it. Anaconda is the code name of the installer for CentOS. So when we installed, it created this file, and it didn't put anything in there. But if I assigned a default gateway inside of this folder, inside of this file, it would apply to every network adapter, unless the network adapter overrode it. The network interface config overrides the global config. So I could put a default value in here that then gets overridden on the individual adapter. So that's one way to do it. There are also services that maintain their own configuration. So DNS, for example, I might choose to not set up DNS on my interfaces at all, which is actually what I'm doing on this box, because inside of /etc, you'll find a file called resolve.conf. Somewhere in here is resolve.conf, right there. And you can define your name servers there. And that's global as well, and it's not dependent on the network interfaces, which is really convenient. So if we take a look at that file, I'm going to edit /etc/resolve.conf, and new file. I apparently pointed it out wrong. Let's see. I must have spelled it wrong or something. I'm still spelling it wrong. Oh, it's inside of sysconfig, isn't it? Oh, no, it's right here. I am apparently having a spelling failure. Resolve.conf. There we go. All right. So once you go in there, you will see there's always, the human element is the worst part of configuring
Live action debugging right here, folks.
It's spectacular. All right. So I can see right here, though, this one was generated by the Network Manager, which is the graphical configuration utility inside of CentOS. And I can see that it's got a search domain of itpro.tv and a name server of 10.0.0.1. I didn't set those. It pulled those apparently from the DHCP server, I guess. But I can come in and change these. If I edit resolve.conf, then restart my network stack, it'll start to use the DNS servers that are here. Again, they can be overridden by the interface config, but this is a global spot where they would be set, and that would take effect. We would now have a name lookup that gets done. There's some other files, which hopefully I can type better than this one. Let me get out of this one if I can. All right, so that was /etc/resolve.conf. Oh, I see what I did earlier. I stuck an E on resolve when I shouldn't have. So your host file. You can use the host file to override DNS lookups. And that one's global. It's actually, I don't believe you can do that on the interface level. It has to be done globally. And so that would be /etc/hosts. And if you look in that file, you'll see IP addresses on the left and domain names on the right. We can override anything. Like I've overridden itpro.tv to point to 1.1.1.1. And you can edit the file, put those changes in there. That takes effect globally. There is one more I want to mention that is not a good one to change globally. /etc/hostname. If you look inside of /etc/hostname, that's where your computer's name comes from. my computer's name is localhost.localdomain, which is pretty lame. That's why my command prompt just says localhost. So you might want to change the name of your computer. If you edit this file and reboot, you'll find that it gets set back to localhost again. And that's because on systemd-based systems, there's now a service that controls that. So if you want to change your name, you need to use the hostnamectl command. So I'm going to say sudo hostnamectl and then set-hostname. And I'm going to change mine to have a host name. I'll just call it CentOS. So I can remember this is my CentOS machine. And when I run that, it makes the change in the background. If I take a look at /etc/hostname, I can see that it took effect. Notice how it didn't obey my capitalization. That's because in DNS, it's not case sensitive, so I lost it. So it went back to normal. But notice how my prompt didn't change. That doesn't mean the setting didn't take effect. If I run the hostname command, for example, it tells me my hostname is set. That's a bash thing. Bash generates your prompt when you first launch the shell. If I close my terminal and open a new one, it'll reload that variable, and now I can see this is deep as at CentOS. I've changed the host name. So sometimes we can edit the file like resolve.conf. Other times we need to use a command like hostnamectl to make the change. You always want to be careful and make sure you're using the right way. Otherwise, you'll lose your changes the next time you reboot, which can be super frustrating.
Are there any easier ways to configure network settings, Don?
Easy is in the eye of the beholder, I guess.
Yeah.
If you have a GUI,
Subjective.
if you have a graphical user interface, it's certainly easier to go there. You'll almost always have a little network icon in the top right of your screen. Like here, I'll show you on mine. If I go up to my top of my screen there, I can click on that and I see my wired connection right there. I can click on and go into wired settings. And in here, it's a GUI, right? We just modify the settings needed. That's honestly the easiest way to do it if you can. If you don't have a GUI, then you've got all these utilities and folders and files and things that I was telling you about. Well, it's frustrating. And if you think that way, you're not the only one. I certainly think that way. So there is a utility that many distros support called the Network Manager. And I know I'm running it because I saw a note in one of my files that said it was created by the Network Manager. But in your system, you can always find out whether you're running the Network Manager by launching the Network Manager CLI, NMCLI. What the Network Manager does is it gives you a command line interface that takes care of everything on the back end. It knows which files to modify. It knows where a setting is supposed to go. So it gives you one place to go to do a consistent configuration. So for example, on this system, if I run NMCLI device status, that's going to call the Network Manager command line interface, and it's going to tell it to give me a listing of my devices. If I run that and I get an error and the command's not there, you're not running the Network Manager. If you run it and you get nothing back, then you're probably doing manual configurations. But if you run it and you get data like I am, that's a good sign, right? That means that I'm running the Network Manager and I can use it to configure things. Although 3 of my adapters are green, which means the Network Manager is controlling them. My 4th adapter, this loopback one, see how it says unmanaged? The Network Manager is not controlling the loopback. That's going to be tied to config files. I'll have to go and do that manually. All right. Now that's my CentOS box. Let's go back over to Ubuntu. And on Ubuntu, they were actually one of the first ones to adopt all this. So when I run NMCLI device status, I get everything that's unmanaged, right? And that's part of that whole NetPlan migration. And also the fact that I've never gone into the configuration utility on this system. It can convert. Like if you use the GUI, whoops, I clicked on the wrong thing. But if you use the GUI and you go in here, see how it says wired unmanaged right now. And I go into my wired settings, I can start to go in and do the configuration. And as I do that, as I do a setup in here, it's going to start managing that adapter and taking it over. So be careful with that. In my case, NetPlan is controlling the adapter, not Network Manager. So always look for that. But assuming that it's configured, like in my case here on my CentOS box where ENS33 is being managed by the Network Manager, I can jump in and start to use it to do the configuration. One tool that manages all the other stuff on the backside. So I did NMCLI device status. That's one way to see data. I could also do NMCLI device show followed by an adapter name like ENS33. And it's going to show me the configuration of that adapter. And it's pulling data in from different places to build this up. But I can see where it's keeping track of my IP address, my gateway, and so on, all right here. And if we want to change it, we can jump in and do that by running NMCLI and pressing enter. Or actually, I want to go a little bit further. if you just press enter, it takes you straight into the raw prompt, and it's kind of hard to figure out where to go from there. So what I normally do is nmcli connection edit followed by the name of the interface. So I'm going to do ENS33. So now I'm going to be directly editing the configuration of that adapter. And oops, actually, let me quit because I didn't sudo that. There we go. All right. So now I'm connected to the adapter, and you can start to issue a number of different commands to configure it. One of the more useful commands is help, so you can learn what is available. But just as an example, I might do set connection.autoconnect yes, saying when the computer boots up, I want this one to automatically connect. Automatically jump on a network if it can. I can do set IPv4.method manual. I don't want to use DHCP. I want to use a static address. And I can provide that address by doing set IPv4.addr 192.168.0.1/24, or we'll do .2 so I don't overlap with anything. So now I'm setting the IP address, right? And you just go through and you issue each of these commands so that it knows what you want. I'll set the IPv4 gateway to 192.168.0.1 and so on. When you get all that done, you can type save to save that configuration, right? Now, when you save, it's really a temporary save, okay? If your system reboots, it'll lose this config. So with save, you can actually go on and say save persistent so that it actually commits it to the hard drive so when you reboot, the settings stay. After that, we can quit, and the changes haven't actually taken effect yet. I need to do sudo nmcli, and then I basically need to tell it to reset. So we can do that by saying connection reload, like that. And it's going to reload that connection and load the configuration in. Now, it's a lot of commands, right? But at least I'm not having to hunt for files and potentially lose settings when I reboot. I have one command, nmcli, that I go in, I get into the network manager, I start to do the configuration. And once that's done, I get out and I save, and I know that it works. So it's still a lot of commands, but at least I know I'm editing things in the right place. That's what the network manager does. And the network manager is what's actually powering the GUI up here. So I don't have to worry about changes in the GUI screwing up my config files or changes in my config files screwing up the GUI. Now they're in sync. So that's what the network manager does. Not every distro has it. If you do a minimal install for like a server, it usually won't have the network manager, but most desktops do. And with the desktop install, it gives you that one command line interface that's it's just designed to help you out a little bit.
Good stuff. Configuring networking, another wonderful episode inside the CompTIA Linux Plus series. And Don, last words.
You know, it's a number of different ways to configure things. So I always recommend if you're going to configure a network adapter, it doesn't hurt to pull up the documentation first to make sure you're doing it in the right place. I only touched on IPv4. IPv6 is configured exactly the same way, though, in the same files, except you just have a different term that you'll use for IPv6 for setting the address. But otherwise, all the utilities and things are basically the same. And stay tuned, because we're going to do another episode on troubleshooting networks. There's a number of tools we can use to figure out why something's not working. So if you've done your configuration and it's not working, stay tuned. We'll cover that.
Looking forward to it. CompTIA Linux Plus is a series that's designed to help you. Make sure you watch each and every episode. You'll be so glad you did. And take advantage of the supplementary information in our course library that's there to help you be even more successful. So check that out too. And tell everybody you know about IT Pro TV. IT Pro TV is binge-worthy. Thanks for watching. I'm Zach Memis.
And I'm Don Pizzette.
We will see you again soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.